Well, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg has arrived on Capitol Hill ahead of multiple hearings with House and Senate committees. Zuckerberg is set to address how the social network users' data was accessed by Cambridge Analytica. That consulting firm used the information for politically targeted advertising during the 2016 presidential election. Facebook says around 87 million Facebook users had their information mined. So for more on Mark Zuckerberg's upcoming testimony, Sam Biddle is a technology reporter for The Intercept, joins us now. So, Sam, we got a little bit of a taste of what Mark Zuckerberg will be saying. He released these opening statements where he sort of throws himself a little bit on the sword and says, look, I created this, I should be responsible. A lot of people are going to say, well, finally, because, they've been asking Facebook to testify before, and that Facebook has sent sort of representatives and lawyers, but never the CEO.
Correct. So it's a big deal in that, this is Mark's big first day, and it's going to be a really tough one.
Right.
But it's also a little dispiriting to read that statement and see how much of it looks just like the apologies the company's been handing out for the past, over a decade now, because this is not their first privacy scandal.
What sort of struck me about this is, he starts off by saying Facebook is an idealistic and optimistic company, and he talks about his desire to connect people, and then sort of switches into, but we never thought these tools were going to be used for bad, essentially. But the tools are not about connecting people. The tools that he doesn't address right here have to do with the data and have to do with how they make their money.
Something that's going to be really uncomfortable for him, and which I'm hoping will get brought up at least a few times on the Hill, is a lot of this is Facebook working as designed.
Exactly.
They are designed to vacuum up huge swaths of personal data and then repackage and make that data available to third-party advertisers. So the Cambridge Analytica thing was a little creepy, but this wasn't a fluke. This wasn't Facebook being abused. It was Facebook being abused by a group Facebook didn't give permission to.
Exactly.
Which is not really very comforting to its 2 billion users, right?
Precisely, unless Facebook is ready to sort of change up its business model completely, which, I don't know if that's going to happen.
Pretty unlikely. I mean, I think the company would rather be broken up into pieces than give up advertising, because without advertising, there is no Facebook.
Exactly. So Mark Zuckerberg announced sort of new plans to fight fake news. Of course, he released it today, one day before the testimony. What do you make of that strategy?
I think it's hard to make very much of it at all. It's funny to go back and see how many times Facebook has said, here's what we're doing about fake news, since before the election. And it's now spring 2018, and they're still rolling out plans.
And some of the stuff we've seen before, making sure that users know how to adjust their privacy settings. This is all kind of old stuff.
Facebook has been offering new tools to make your privacy settings easier to understand for years and years and years. And clearly it's not working. If every time there's a scandal like this, people are saying, oh my God, I had no idea I was sharing this to begin with. The tools aren't good enough.
How easy or hard do you think lawmakers will be on Mark Zuckerberg?
Very hard. The last time Facebook was asked to testify about Russian interference, Zuckerberg sat out. Facebook and Google and Twitter sent lawyers instead of their chief executives. I think that was a terrible move, because it is now given a lot of these senators a chip on their shoulder. Who, they're saying, why haven't you been here years ago to sit in the hot seat? So there's going to be a lot of pent-up grief about Facebook. This is going to be far wider, I think, than Cambridge Analytica.
So you're a lawmaker. Obviously, you want to know, how did this happen? And how are you going to stop it? But then what's next? What other questions would you be asking?
What's next, I think, is, how can we trust you? I think there's going to be a big element of rebuilding trust, because Facebook first learned about this Cambridge Analytica stuff years ago, didn't inform its users. They took Cambridge Analytica at its word that they had deleted the data. Turns out that wasn't the case. But I think that we should all be asking, and I think lawmakers will be asking, why didn't you do anything about it at the time? And when this happens again, how can we trust you not to sit on it for another couple of years and act immediately?
Who owns our data? Does Facebook own it when we get online?
Facebook and a lot of other companies. Facebook has been getting a lot of flack, deservedly, but they are far from the only company that stockpiles your consumer demographic data and resells it. Google is just as bad.
So since Google, Facebook, and a number of other companies, since this is part of their business model, this is the way they make their money, after all the outrage is settled, will there be any real change, do you think?
I'd like to think yes.
Yeah.
I'd like to say yes. I think that when you have 2 billion people using your service around the world, that's a pretty good head start. I think that getting 2 billion people to change their daily behavior is really tough. And I think that outrage, especially this year, passes pretty quickly. I don't think it's a given that this will change anything in any meaningful way.
So then is it time for the government to step in with some sort of regulation?
If the government wants to see change, they're going to have to mandate that change.
Right. Sam, I want you to stick around because we have Nancy Cordes. She's on Capitol Hill. She is our hey, Nancy, I can see you right there. Nancy, I see just behind you, I think, is the area where Mark Zuckerberg came in. Did he say anything as he walked in?
Nope, he was surrounded by reporters and cameras, but he ducked directly into Florida Democratic Senator Bill Nelson's office. They've been meeting in there for about 20 minutes or so, and so you can see the huge gaggle of reporters and cameramen who are waiting here for Zuckerberg to depart on his way to, we don't exactly know where. We know that he has other meetings scheduled with lawmakers. He's trying to essentially pave the way for his hearings tomorrow and on Wednesday, meeting with some key lawmakers like Bill Nelson, a top Democrat on the Senate Commerce Committee, one of the 2 Senate committees he'll be testifying before tomorrow, basically to develop a rapport, to answer some of these sticky questions in private in the hopes that they will go a little easier on him tomorrow when he makes his maiden appearance before Congress. Typically, Zuckerberg sends someone else in leadership to do these kinds of public appearances, particularly on Capitol Hill. But this time he's got his suit and tie on, and he's doing it himself.
I got to say, we just rolled some of that video there, and he looks super uncomfortable.
Right. I mean, he is known as someone who doesn't love the spotlight. That's part of the reason that he has typically delegated these types of appearances to underlings. We know that he's been doing a great deal of prep work in advance of these hearings. For the uninitiated, those who have never gone before Congress in this setting before, it's difficult even when it's a friendly hearing, even when you're just there to answer, the questions that are coming from curious lawmakers. In this case, we know that there are going to be a number of senators and congressmen the next day on Wednesday who have very pointed questions for Zuckerberg. Most notably, why is it that Facebook waited more than 2 years to inform customers that their data had been harvested in this way? Why did it take big reports in the New York Times and The Guardian for Facebook to discuss this at all? And that is a question that he and his number 2, Sheryl Sandberg, really haven't been able to answer satisfactorily so far.
And I know, there has been the idea of maybe it's time for the government to step in. Maybe it's time for some government regulation has certainly popped up. In fact, in a recent interview, Mark Zuckerberg said that he wouldn't be completely opposed to the idea. It was something he would certainly entertain. Do you expect that will come up with the lawmakers as well?
I'm sure it will, particularly from Democrats, although because Congress is controlled by Republicans right now, we haven't seen a big push for new regulations in any sector. And that's probably part of the reason that Zuckerberg felt so comfortable going out there and saying, hey, I'm fine potentially with you regulating my industry. That's not something you typically hear from business titans, but he knows that this is the Trump administration, which has been working very hard to roll back as many regulations as possible. And it's unlikely that you'll suddenly see a big push here on Capitol Hill to reverse that in the tech sector, even though there is a lot of concern among Democrats and Republicans about the power of these social media companies, the vulnerabilities to bad actors both at home and abroad. And you do see some legislation being pushed by Democrats and some Republicans, for example, to require organizations that advertise on sites like Facebook, putting up issue ads, to at the very least identify who they are and to have to be authenticated in the same way that people get authenticated on Twitter when there's someone who's in the public eye, so that people who are reading those tweets know that, yes, in fact, this person is who they claim to be. There's been a push, it's called the Honest Ads Act, by a group of senators to say the same thing should take place on Facebook. And Facebook has sort of preemptively, in an attempt to show Congress that it really is taking this seriously, gone ahead last week and said it is going to set up a process by which organizations will have to get authorized before they air those ads, because that's something we now know was a big problem in the lead up to the 2016 campaign, when you had Russians and others pretending to be someone they weren't, with the goal of disrupting the election process.
Right. Well, Nancy Cordes, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So, Sam, we've been talking a lot about, what the government can do, what Facebook can do. I got to ask you this question. How much of the responsibility lands in our laps, though, as users? I mean, we know that we're giving up our privacy in exchange for this service.
I think it's a very good point to say that, yes, at this point in 2018, we should be educated as consumers, as users, as best we can. However, I don't think anyone, when they've signed up for Facebook or any Google service for that matter, are aware of the extent to which their data is not only going to be harvested, but then repackaged and resold, and that is the Facebook business. It's not just a part of it or a feature of it. That is literally the only thing that makes Facebook a valuable company.
Yeah.
So, I think that Facebook needs to be much more transparent and maybe simplify some of the legalese that people scroll through and never read when they're signing up for a service.
Definitely.
But yeah, you're right. I think people should have some expectation, but no one without a PhD in computer science can really know the full extent of it.
I've definitely been guilty of, seeing this sort of new privacy regulations pop up and kind of skimming through them, and I'm going to use Facebook anyway, so then I don't even really think about it. And what really sort of concerns me too is what's going to happen in the future. I mean, we know how the data is being used now, but we also don't know where the technology is going, what
Right.
AI could do with that sort of data, and just the sky's the limit, essentially, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we are starting a sort of renaissance of artificial intelligence and machine learning techniques. And you're exactly right. We're only at sort of the forefront of that now. Where that is in 5 years, what can be done with our data that we wrote into the service in 2005 and forgot about when we were students or something.
Boy, yeah.
Where that data is still sitting somewhere. It doesn't go away when you've grown up and when you've moved on. It's sitting there forever.
Now you're really scaring me. Sam Biddle from The Intercept, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And of